Brilliant. Okay, so that was part of a performance. In fact, the third movement of John Cage's piece, 4 minutes, 33 seconds. Are you familiar with this piece? Hands up if you are familiar with this piece. Okay, quite a few of you. Right. So, and on the right there, there's the score. These are the instructions from the composer to the performers. And tacet just means that you don't play your instrument for that movement. Okay. So what you'll notice is that the performers are not playing their instruments. Okay. But nonetheless, they're performing. I think what we've got here, interestingly, is a piece which is for instruments, but not to be played on instruments. I'll come back to that. There he is, look. Lovely. I mean, he's the sort of man who kind of help you out if your car wouldn't start. Nothing to fear there. Here's what he says. Difficult with Cage because he's not always 100% clear about what his work is about, what the point of it is. But the first thing I want to say, and I think here he agrees with me, is that what we haven't got here is a silent work. Okay? Rather, a performance of that work is made up of the kinds of sounds that would normally be classed as mere noise in the performance of a normal work of music. Right? So, if you're listening to Beethoven's Fifth Symphony in the Bridgewater Hall, and the person next to you is shuffling their feet or rustling their program, or worse, what happened to me once, opens a Tupperware box and starts eating some sandwiches, right? The noise they make is normally classed as mere noise, ambient noise, and not part of the performance. The point about 4 minutes 33 is that those sounds actually become part of the performance. So it's not a silent work. And Cage thinks that such works are what he calls modern. So there's him saying just that. Okay, so I'm going to use a pointer now. Look at that. If the music can accept ambient sounds and not be interrupted thereby, it's a modern piece of music. Hold it right there. Question, it's a modern piece. Is it a modern piece of music? That's our question, right? If, as with a composition by Beethoven, a baby crying or someone in the audience coughing interrupts the music, then we know that it isn't modern. Right? So he's trying to write a modern piece. He thinks it's music. Here's what I think, right? I think this is a really good piece, a really interesting piece of art, but it's not music. And so what I'm going to try and do is explain to you why I think that, why I think those two things, that it's an important, maybe even a profound work of art, but not a piece of music. Why it doesn't matter that it's not a piece of music, really. Okay, here goes. Let's see how we get on. What's the point of this work? I mean, maybe that's a question that's kind of occurred to you. Well, I think the point is what you might call art political. This is what he's doing here. It's very clear from what he says about his own work that he's against what I've called the valorization of traditional works of music. That's to say, you know, he's a bit sick and tired of the same old thing, going to concerts, listening to performances of works that are very familiar to us. And he thinks that our insistence on keeping doing that actually prevents us from appreciating the aesthetic qualities of the sounds of our environment. He thinks those sounds have aesthetic qualities. They can be enriching to us if we only took the time to listen to them properly, maybe in the same kind of way that we listen to works of music. Okay. That's the first thing. Second thing, he's opposed to what I call composer fetishism. So he wants to try and remove all traces of his ego from the work. And what he means by that is that he wants how the work sounds to kind of have not too much to do with him, right? So he then composes a work, 4 minutes, 33 seconds, whose performances are largely made up of sounds that are not made by the performers, right? So the idea is that what he does is he writes a piece such that the conductor, you saw him doing it there, as it were, frames the sounds that the people in the audience, and also people outside the hall, those kinds of sounds, frames those sounds and it's sort of telling us to listen to those sounds. He doesn't want to be controlling, okay, how a performance of the work sounds. That's what he's interested in. That's removing his ego from the work. He doesn't think that the music should really be about his preferences, what he wants, right? He wants to create a work with all traces of his ego removed. He was a Zen Buddhist. I think that's got something to do with it, okay? Interesting, right? Question, is this music? Right, that's the question I want you to kind of hang on to, right? So we've got this work, largely made up of sounds that are not produced by the performers. The performers that you saw them, they're the people who put their instruments down, the musicians. They're the performers. But most of the sounds making up the performance come from other sources, right? In a normal work of music, what happens, right, when it's performed is that the performers on the stage produce the sounds as instructed by the composer via his score or her score, the set of instructions. The point about the instructions given to performers here is that they tell them to be quiet, not to play the instruments. It's a way of ensuring that the sounds making up the performance aren't produced according to Cage's own instructions, right? But it's this music. Right. I want to point it there. Why? Why? Okay. This is where it gets a little bit fiddly, right? So kind of bear with me. It's about works of music now. So I'm going to come at this via what I think is required for something to be a work of music, and then see whether Cage's work meets this condition. I'm a philosopher. This is the way I work. Okay? Right. Think about works of art generally. How does somebody create a work of art? Here's the thought, right? By working in an artistic medium and then arranging elements of that medium to create the work of art. Here's an example. Think of a painter. God, it's bright. Think of a painter, right? The medium is paint and canvas. They create an artwork, in this case a painting, by arranging paint on the canvas. So making an artwork looks to be a matter of organising elements of a medium. It might be paint, it might be clay, whatever. So here's the intuition, that for a work to be a work of music, music's an art form, right? I hope so. It'll have to be made up of, well, it's a sonic art form, it's to do with sound, made up of sounds organised by the work's composer. That's the thought. Just like a painting is made up of paint and canvas, organised by the artist. Well, I've made the point that 4 minutes 33 is not a silent work. The performances are made up of sounds, right? So, okay, we're in the right ballpark for this to be music, maybe. But let's think on. Okay, let's try and flesh out this rough intuition. I'm going to try and get you from here to here, okay? Right, thought. A composer, right, doesn't work with sounds like a painter works with paint, right? It's not as if the composer pulls sounds out of the ether and literally arranges them into something and hey presto, got the work of music. Rather, what they do is this, it seems to me. They arrange sounds by virtue of issuing instructions to performers on how to produce sounds, on the kinds of sounds that are wanted. So they organise sounds into a work of music by issuing these instructions. Okay, so that's what Beethoven did when he composed the Fifth Symphony. Yes, it's in a loose sense organising sounds, but he did that by writing a very, very complicated score, right, which instructed people who wanted to perform that work on the sounds they were to produce. In that sense, he was controlling, in a slightly indirect sense, the sounds produced by performers when they performed it. Get the idea? Yeah? They follow the score. The sounds are produced according to the instructions. Okay. So here's my thought. That is something that's required for something to be a work of music. It must be the case that its performances are made up of sounds produced by performers of the work as a result of their following the composer's instructions. That's required for something to be a work of music proper. It's not the only thing required. There's plenty of organised sound that isn't music, police sirens and the like, but that's certainly one thing that's required. And my thought is that 4 minutes 33, interesting artwork that it is, does not meet that condition and so is not music. I've kind of got to the end already, but I'm going to kind of say a bit more. I'm going to point it there. Well, God only knows what reason. That's it. Right. Okay. This is a very wordy slide for which I apologise. Okay, so now we can distinguish, right, when it comes to works of music, right, whether a sound heard during the performance of a work counts as part of that performance or counts as mere ambient noise happening at the same time. So we can distinguish between the sounds that make up a performance from, say, normally from, say, someone shuffling their feet or from, ambient noise from outside the concert hall wafting in. And it's this. If the sound is produced by a performer as a result of her following the composer's instructions, it's part of the performance's content. If it's not produced by that means, it's mere noise. Okay? That's kind of the intuition we have, right? The sounds of the performance are those produced by the performers following the composer's instructions. Any other sounds occurring at the same time, babies crying, people shuffling their feet, planes flying overhead, they're not part of the performance. That's just ambient noise. That's mere noise, right? This looks like a good necessary condition to me because the nice thing about it is it still allows lots of avant-garde works to count as music, and that's intuitive. That seems right. Let me tell you about one such avant-garde work. It's by Cage. It was composed the year before he composed 4 minutes 33. It's called Imaginary Landscape No. 4. It's a piece for 12 shortwave radios, right? And 24 musicians. Each radio has 2 knobs on it, controlling volume and frequency. And the score specifies precisely what each pair of musicians working on each radio should do, how far they should twist the knobs, right? Now, Cage in his score does not specify how a performance should sound. All he specifies is how the sounds should be produced, viz. By twisting the knobs. I mean, fantastic. Look on YouTube. You've got a conductor beating time, right? And there's people twiddling away, Of course, depending on when and where the performance takes place, it will sound extremely different, right? Nonetheless, by my lights, it counts as music. It meets this condition because the sounds are produced by performers following the instructions of the composer. Right? It's just that they're instructions that don't specify how the performance should sound. They're instructions just specifying how the sound should be produced. Nice one. So what I've been able to do is distinguish between avant-garde music and stuff that isn't music. 4 minutes 33 isn't music. It doesn't meet that condition. Now, so I conclude 4 minutes 33 is not music. Does this really matter? I don't think it does matter. I think the piece still fulfills its art political purpose. Maybe it can be about music without being itself a work of music. It's asking us to consider what music is. I think that's one of the purposes of this piece. It can also encourage us to discern the aesthetic features of environmental sounds without itself being a work of music. Again, it's saying to us, listen to these sounds. Listen to them as if they're music. Appreciate them. Right? Those shufflings of feet. So, it seems to me, what we've got here is not a work of music, but a witty, I think profound, actually, getting us to focus on our environment and maybe appreciate it aesthetically, getting us to question what the nature of music is, maybe even what the nature of art is. Witty, profound work of performance, a pretty early work of conceptual art, right? But not music. There you go.